Traveling the Vortex.
We've joined the Doctor as he travels the Vortex and arrive at episode 466, where there is a doctor in the horse. I'm Keith.
I'm Sean.
I'm Glenn.
How are you guys?
Still alive!
And we're actually traveling with the Doctor now.
We are. He's back on board. Or we're back on board the TARDIS. I don't know which one.
I think it's probably that way. Have you guys been?
Pretty good. You?
Not too bad. Liam has gone into a little bit of a sleep regression, so I'm a bit more tired than normal.
Oh, no. He's not sleeping through the night, or?
Yeah, he's waking up several times throughout the night. He
do
was
that.
doing so great, and then a couple weeks ago he just slipped back.
He'll catch back up again.
Yeah. We just can't figure out why, if there was any reason, or,
Yeah, sometimes
one night he sleeps through the night, the next night he doesn't.
I think both of our kids went through that. And I remember with Caitlin, when she did it, we were like, oh no, we're back to this again. And it only lasted a few weeks. And then Mason, I think when it happened, we were like, okay, this won't be any big deal. He'll eventually get back to sleeping through the night. And I think he was like a week maybe.
Mm. When Gemma did it, she had gotten sick, so we assumed that's why. And she's still not through it. She still wakes up and comes to our bed in the middle of the night.
Well, that's not good.
At least she can get up and come to our bed now on her own and just crawl into bed with us.
Well, that's good.
We got Shy into a big girl bed. I got a pair of bunk beds so that if we have one of the other grandkids over, they can come spend the night as well. And so far, she's only fallen out of it once, so I'm counting that as a win.
That is good. What fun have you guys done?
I returned to a theater.
What'd you go
Again?
see? I went and saw Tenet.
Mm.
Which is one of the few that could drag me into a theater in the middle of a pandemic. Oh, there's a new Christopher Nolan? Okay. It was good. I enjoyed it.
I heard it was probably the weakest of his movies.
It's interesting. I come to this with a kind of a jaded attitude because it's very much, as you guys would be able to attest, if you took Reviver and 12/21 and mashed them together and had a $1 zillion budget, you've got Tenet. So I was a little angry about it actually, but it's frustrating to know that we are 10 years ahead of the curve. That we just, if only somebody had given us money, we'd be there. So 10 years, $1 million short, yeah, that's all right. But no, I thought it was better than Dunkirk, but I know that I'm in the minority with that group. So
I actually got 2 movies watched. Jojo Rabbit, which I thought was pretty good, but not as funny as I'd hoped it was going to be. Of course, the best parts were when Hitler was actually on the screen, because Taika is just so funny.
Right.
And it was a lot. Took the subject matter a lot more serious than I thought, but it was good. And then Gemma discovered Trolls World Tour, so we've been watching that quite a bit.
I saw
Which
that.
I have to say, it's not bad.
I haven't even seen the first Trolls movie, actually.
I haven't either.
the first one is far and away better than World Tour. Not that World Tour is bad. It's just it's not the first one.
Right.
World Tour kind of has a Guitar Hero feel to it to me, probably because of some of the songs in it.
Yeah.
I didn't really I don't think I've watched it. Well, I've watched a bunch of stuff, but what did I watch? Oh, I've been watching Doom Patrol, which I think is really good on HBO Max. I think it was a DC, that GC streaming channel original, and they've moved it over to HBO Max. It's really, really good. And then, although I'm waiting for them to move Teen Titans over there because that looks really good, and I think they kind of tie together. And then the other thing that I did was I listened to the Big Finish audio Out of Time with the 4th Doctor and the 10th Doctor.
Oh yeah.
It is really, really good. It's nothing like earth shattering. It's not what was the big crossover event that they did. It's not quite to that level, but it's really, really cool. It plays to both of the Doctor's strength. It highly plays to their strength, and it really, whoever, I think. I can't remember who wrote it, but whoever wrote it, he definitely had both of them in mind when he wrote it. It's really, really well done. I won't say much more about it because eventually we'll review it on here.
Yes, soon.
Very cool. Yeah, I look forward to hearing that one.
All right, Keith, what do we got in the news this week?
Well, the biggest news that we have this week is that the BBC has announced the final piece of the Time Lord Victorious story arc, which will be a 5-part mini-series on YouTube called Daleks. It will be
Dun, dun, dun.
5 10-minute animated episodes featuring a cast including Nicholas Briggs, and I'm not going to try to pronounce her actual name. I'm just going to say Ronnie from Sarah Jane Adventures.
I believe it's Anji Mohindra.
Yeah,
There you go.
I think that's right, yeah.
Along with Joe Sugg and Aisha and 20 new people coming to Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And they're even revealed a trailer to come with it.
More
That's all the information we have about it.
More of a teaser. I was reading somewhere that this is actually it'll be the culmination too of the event, that everything kind of sort of leads to the last episode of this audio series, or this animated series. So I don't know what that means, but it sounds like this is where it ends up. So
That's pretty exciting.
I've just had me a bit of a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Between what we are going to have with this Daleks animated series and all of the animation from Power of the Daleks and whatever other sources that may be out there, we probably have enough material now that we could re-edit it all, supply our own voices, and do our own Dalek series. Like just an ongoing Dalek series.
Yeah.
Think of Red versus Blue. Somebody put that on the list of things to get on.
Why don't you just get on that, Sean?
You just get on it.
Just give us a script. Give us a script, and I'll read from voices.
Okay, I got your word on it now.
Yep.
That was the trap. I was actually just looking for an approval. So I've got them roped in now, guys.
All right. Well,
I don't think we have a release date for it either yet, do we?
November is what it says on the main page. November. I just saw it here. Available for fans to watch weekly on the YouTube channel. In November. Yeah. Which might be why this all culminates in this, because I think that is the last thing on the list too. It goes. Everything releases. I don't think there's anything that releases. Well, no, there's something that releases.
What's interesting is I'm looking at the timeline, and it goes all the way through March 1.
Yep.
The last thing is like Time Fracture, and then the Time Lord Victorious and Brian the Ood on March 1st.
Yeah, so
there's a huge gap between the last one, December 10th.
That's a little deceiving, and the reason being is because the Time Fracture is the live event. And they were going to do it at the end of the year, but they couldn't because of COVID, so they pushed it into next year. And then the Brian the Ood and the 10th Doctor, those are just figures in that line of figures that are coming out. So that's kind of deceiving, because while the Brian the Ood and Doctor might have a short story with it, from my research, it doesn't look like it does so far. So I think that's just when the last set of figures releases is after next year. Yeah, but for all intents and purposes, this entire event will be done in December.
And they haven't updated the timeline to include Daleks yet. So
yeah, I saw that.
But it starts in November of 5 weeks. I mean,
I sort of think that, and Sean had mentioned this to me, and that's what kind of made me sort of think about it, was I'm wondering if they will have cleverly figured out a way to tie this into Resolution of the Daleks in at the end of December.
That would be awesome.
Yeah,
I'm still betting yes.
I'm not gonna put too much hope in there, so I'm not disappointed, but it might be too late now. I've already now that idea is in my head. I don't know if I can get rid of it.
You're already invested in it now.
Yeah.
See, I try not to usually think that way, because then I get really invested in it, and I get excited, and then I'm like, oh, then I'm all that much more let down when it doesn't happen.
But the potential of it makes me even more excited for Time Lord Victorious, so, you know.
Yes, yeah, me too.
Because this is a lot of 10th Doctor. I'm just saying.
It is a lot of 10th Doctor.
And the 10th Doctor I'm not a big fan of. That part of the 10th Doctor timeline.
Well,
Sorry, that took me a minute. That was such a deep cut callback there, Keith.
there's going to be plenty of Ninth Doctor and Eighth Doctor in this as well. So.
That's true. It's very true.
Well, and isn't it interesting that I don't know, some rag magazine over in the UK just had this poll where David Tennant once again came out on top as the best Doctor, followed very closely
Did
behind.
you just call the radio? Did you just call the Radio Times a rag magazine?
Was it the Radio Times?
Yeah,
I only
the
saw
Radio Times.
I don't know where it originated. I saw it posted from the Daily Mirror, so that's why I didn't bother repeating it. But
right. Yeah,
okay, well, I stand corrected.
At least the headline I saw said it was the Radio Times. So.
But so they just released this poll, and 10 and 13 are the quote unquote best Doctors of the bunch. Well, if we've got this Time Lord Victorious that really seems to focus on the 10th Doctor, and it's culminating in a 13th Doctor episode, maybe there's a crossover there.
Well, that means that that makes it sound like you're implying that the
it's going to be a multi-Doctor story.
Well, no, that the poll was fixed.
Of course it was.
Well, if it was the mirror, I might believe that.
How else would you drum up support for this upcoming episode and crossover event? I mean, come on.
Radio Times is pretty worthwhile, trusted magazine. So,
understanding that it's from Radio Times does put a slight hole in my in my theory. If it was from the Mirror, I'd be much more comfortable making that statement. But I'll still throw it out there. We'll see.
Can you really gauge off of 50,000 votes?
And then there's the realist of the group. Thanks, Keith.
I'm surprised.
I've missed you guys.
Talking about that list, I'm surprised William Hartnell is as high as he is at number 6.
Is he at number 6?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we're gonna talk about the poll now.
I haven't thought about it, but
what?
Sorry.
You want the breakdown?
Yeah, give us the breakdown, Keith.
It goes David Tennant, Jodie Whittaker, Peter Capaldi, Matt Smith, Tom Baker, William Hartnell, Paul McGann, Christopher Eccleston, John Pertwee, Patrick Troughton, Sylvester McCoy, Colin Baker, and then Peter Davison.
Oh, wait a minute. Peter Davison lands under Colin Baker?
By 8 votes.
Wow. So here's what I think. I
and
think
the difference between David Tennant and Jodie Whittaker was only...
They both got 21%.
Less than 100.
Yeah, they both are right at 21% each.
95 votes is the difference.
If I was Tom, I would demand a recount.
Yeah, Tom down at 5. That's interesting.
But he's got a big jump to get to Matt Smith.
Yeah. Again, this thing, it's cyclical. It comes out. I think they do this like every 5, maybe even less years, and every year there's a different one. Although I think David Tennant's come out on at least in the top 2 for the last couple of times I've seen this poll from Radio Times. So.
Well, and it's unsurprising that the top 5 is new series loaded.
Right.
So,
although Christopher Eccleston is outside of the top 5 at number 8. So, all right. Well,
I stand by my statement.
Speaking of William Hartnell at number 6.
Nice transition.
we reviewed a William Hartnell story this week as we revisit our Lost in Time series. This time we're doing The Myth Makers, and this was season 3, I think it is.
It is, in fact, season 3.
This is most notable because it is the departure of one of our companions.
Are you ready for the synopsis?
Let's hear it.
The Myth Makers. Long, long ago on the great plains of Asia Minor, 2 mighty armies faced each other in mortal combat. The armies were the Greeks and the Trojans, and the prize they were fighting for was Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. To the Greeks it seemed that the city of Troy was impregnable, and only a miracle could bring them success. And then help comes to them in the most unexpected way, as a strange blue box materializes close to their camp, bringing with it the first Doctor, Stephen and Vicki, who soon find themselves caught up in their irreversible tide of history and legend.
Where'd the synopsis come from?
The Target novelization.
Oh, okay. So from the book.
According to Goodreads.
Okay, I got that. I was looking at the wiki one, because the TARDIS wiki one, because I thought that's the one you would go with, and I'm like, whoa, no, this is completely different. It's not different. They obviously both summarize it the same things, but this one's much shorter.
Actually published one.
What'd you guys think?
I like this story. I wasn't a huge fan of the novelization, but I like the story.
Oh, are you wrong? I loved the novelization. I thought the novelization. In fact, this is my second time around with the reconstruction of this. And the first time I saw it, I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it a lot. I thought, oh, that's a good Hartnell story. A little rough watching the loose cannon reconstruction because, I mean, they do the best they can, but it's a lot of the same picture and over again.
Yeah.
Not to be disparaging, but this definitely appeared to me to be one of the worst loose cannon reconstructions as far as quality of material that was available to them.
So that's the thing is, I don't think worse is probably the wrong terminology just because it disparages loose cannon in name. They did with what they had to work with.
Right.
And
let me be clear on that.
In fact, let me go in to defend this. This could have been a much worse reconstruction because this is one of the few serials that has no telesnaps. There are absolutely no telesnaps whatsoever available for this. What is used in this is some like a handful of publicity photos. And what they did is the loose cannon guys got really creative, and they used I think it was a telemovie or a teleseries in the UK called I, Claudius, which has a lot of the same elements. And they superimposed faces, and they used, a lot of the clips that were used in this were that. Thankfully, this reconstruction has more moving pictures than a lot we've seen because of, and I don't know who did this, but somebody back in the 60s pointed a 8mm camera at their TV. And so anything that you saw moving in this that wasn't like extras or cutaway shots, whenever you saw, that grainy, you could see the picture, the television oval from the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that was actually somebody shooting that off of their TV. So they had that.
It looked like it.
Yeah, they had that. Fortunately, some of the movement of the soldiers, I think, was stuff from I, Claudius. I believe they even did a few model shots. So when you saw the Trojan horse rolling forward, I think that was a model shot that they had built. Same thing with the city of Troy for the establishing shot. So they went out of their way to reconstruct this in such a way that they had something to work with. So kudos to them and a pat on the back, but it is difficult because there is a lot of switching between the same photos for a lot of this. Because
absolutely. I mean, no disparaging to loose cannons.
Yeah.
When I say that, it's specifically just because of there's not an abundance of material to work with.
Yeah.
When you could really tell that there wasn't, and they utilized what they had very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, having said that, you just said that the model shot of the horse that was done by loose cannons?
I believe they put that together. If not, that came out of I, Claudius as well. But I don't think that was the case on that one. And I'm doing a lot of this from memory from reading this a long time ago, so I could be wrong. I know they did use their own models for some things, but I'm pretty sure this was one of them.
Well, that's both impressive and disappointing, because that's one of the things I was going to talk about was how cool that model shot was, that it still existed, and it's like, wow, I'm very impressed that they pulled that off for what was this, episode 65?
Yes.
And, not that it's not impressive if loose cannons built it, but...
No, that was not a Doctor Who thing, so...
I guess if it was in Claudius, it was still authentic, period, so...
Yeah, that's true, because... I think that
was part of what I was going to compliment too. Was I wish I could have truly seen how they had handled it as opposed to the film version.
I would agree. But like I say, this was my second go around with the Recon, and the first time I watched it, I quite enjoyed it. It was really good. And then I picked up the book earlier in the week and started it, and I absolutely loved it. In fact, what I love the best about it is. And this is what's missing from the serial that I wish was in there. And I know one of you guys is going to say, well, technically he's there, but all of this being from the perspective of Homer, I think, or the story being recounted by Homer through the book, I think is just brilliant. And the idea that, Homer went and fabricated all of these, wonderful stories about Odysseus and the Iliad and the Odyssey, and then he's come back and decided to tell this as it really was. I thought was a clever device, and I think that this book was actually written by the same guy that wrote the stories for TV. I think Donald Cotton wrote both that and the book, didn't he?
He did write the series, yeah.
Yeah.
And he
So,
wrote the book, so, yeah.
so I think
Serial.
I wonder how much of the novelization, because the novelization would have been written much later than the series, because they didn't start doing these until the 70s and 80s, really turning out the books. I wonder how much of that was originally in the script and got cut out by a story editor or a script editor at some point. And I'd really want to bend his ear and say, how much of this did you intend for the... Because I think that the story on television would have done even better having Homer being that messenger back and forth instead of this kind of random Cyclops. They call him Cyclops in the Reconstruction little... I guess he's said by... They call him Cyclops by name too in the story, but that character almost seemed like a unnecessary device. It's like they created the character in order to be this messenger to get information back and forth, but then didn't utilize the character well enough. And then at some point they have to make it so that the doctor doesn't get the message. So they just end up killing the guy. And I thought the use of the messenger in this, I think, was poorly done and much better realized in the book.
I agree to some extent. I liked it initially, but then thought as the story went on that it started veering too far away from what they did on screen. That, especially when it comes to the ending, there's so much of that he just kind of glosses over as the end of the story, and we don't really... There's huge chunks that we don't get to see from in the novelization that are in the actual episodes. Mm. So that aspect of it is what kind of soured me on the novelization. Had they continued it through to actually give me all the bits and then added some to it, I would have liked it a little bit more. That being said, one aspect of novelization that I liked is while there was humor in this in the story, the novelization added a whole lot more.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially with him running back and forth, and it almost becomes comedic at that point because he's trying to be in two places at once.
Right.
That's one of the really interesting things with this is when you look back at the historicals, specifically within the William Hartnell era, it seems like they're either very serious, period piece dramas like Marco Polo, or they are almost farcical, like Glenn's favorite episode, which I'm blanking on the name now. It's the Tombstone Gunfighters. Thank you.
Written by Donald Cotton.
Which explains a little bit about this one. Because I think this episode manages to do both. It has an absurd amount of humor in it. The way that the characters, whether they're the Greeks or the Trojans, relate to each other, and it's very barbed and very quick-witted, and there's a lot of back and forth between them. That's just absolutely fantastic, and so that kind of pushes it almost more into that. Okay, this is just going to be a farce, but then they will do something else it reins it back in, and it's like, oh. Okay, no, you're really kind of treating this seriously just with humor. That's really interesting. The novel leans more heavily into the farce elements, I feel. And not necessarily that that's a bad thing. When it first started, I kind of had that sinking, oh, God, you're going to narrate this whole thing, aren't you? This is going to be one of those books. Okay. Because generally when a character steps in, and specifically one of this nature, he's trying to be more wittyful and more name-dropping than the Doctor himself is. And that tends to, in my mind, that tends to shift the spotlight a little bit off of, the characters and the goings-on, and it's more about, look how great I am at telling you this story. So initially, I was really worried about getting into it. But realistically, by the second chapter, he had won me over because it was just so much fun to read. And as it went on and continued to build upon itself, and he found unique ways of saying, now, unbeknownst to me at the time, but this
yeah.
is what was happening over here.
Or you can imagine what was said, that
Yes,
kind of thing. Yeah.
and little things like that, and he won me over with the telling of it.
I think where it works with the book from that standpoint is that he becomes a central character to the story. And I think that if he had just been a narrator, narrating the plight of these people as an observer, I think it could have gotten very, oh no, we've just got him telling this story. But I think him becoming a central point to it works, because then it adds to the humor of it all.
Yeah, it's almost a Love and Monsters style take on it. Mm-hmm. And to Keith's point, I do agree that watching the episode and seeing specifically that final the final segment of it, and then reading the novelization and seeing how different that really is, I do agree with Keith on that I wish there was more elements that they had managed to work into the book and play a little straighter in that regard.
Yeah.
But that's why we do both, because it lends to some, it's not a book on record. It's a it's a novelization.
It's not a script. It's a novelization. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that bothered me about the serial, the TV serial, is it verges on becoming unbalanced at the end. And the reason I say that is because for the first three stories, or for the first three episodes, it's a fun, farce, humorous ride. And everything that happens is, there are fights and there is death, but it's still done in such a light enough tone around it that it doesn't feel unbalanced. But in the final the final episode of this story, about halfway through, when Odysseus is becoming, he pretty much turns into, from being kind of an anti-hero to the villain of the piece. And with the interaction between he and the doctor in the horse, and then the whole battle and deaths and everything, just everything that's happening. Troy being sacked, while we can't really see it because we're just seeing still pictures, I imagine that it was probably a very action-packed set piece, and I would have enjoyed being able to actually see it. But I think it feels a little unbalanced to the rest of the story, because now we've gone into this really kind of tragic. We've suddenly. I grew to like Paris. I even grew to like Cassandra, even though she's kind of the other anchor villain in this, because she's. But you feel a little bad for her because she saw this coming. She was actually a bit of a victim in this, because everything that she was saying was coming true, and so, and I got to like their dad. I can't remember his name. I got to like him too because of his compassion and leniency on Vicki, and so it felt unbalanced when we get to the fourth part of this act, and it just that troubled me a bit. Not enough for me to dislike the story in any way, but I felt that the book, understanding that this has been a fun, lighthearted, humorous story, so we're not going to dwell on what happens in the battle. I think that worked for me better. And
it leans into your idea that maybe some of these directions in the episode were producer top-down related.
Yeah.
That, I can imagine it being written as one of those, and the Doctor and his companions sneak off in the night as the sounds of the battle rage, and that's where you leave it. And instead, somebody in the production team went, "Oh, no. We went through all this trouble to build Troy. We're going to burn it down."
Right.
Give the people what they want. And so you're not wrong there, that it does feel a little unbalanced at times.
See, but I did like the fact that it uses the comedy to lighten the mood leading up to it, and it makes, the Trojans and the Greeks fairly likable. The Greeks not as much, kind of, where things are headed. And while Odysseus is pretty good, Agamemnon's pretty despicable through most of it. But it kind of shines that light of in history, which is told by the winners,
right.
you don't really get to see the perspective of the losers and how they're real people and have these lives, and we're probably pretty likable too. And so it does that with comedy and getting to know the other characters, and then you get the tragedy of, oh yeah, these people are all gonna die.
Well,
And I like that.
I
I
think
thought it
that's
worked well.
I think that's another strength to the book is that Homer really illustrates that he gets to like the the
That's
Trojans.
true.
I mean,
Yeah.
it shows that, and I think that even gives kind of some paths to the fact that, for the sake of the comedy of the character, when Odysseus stabs his eye out, I got that. I thought, okay, this was a clever way in order for them to explain Homer's blindness, alleged blindness, even if Homer even exists, because there's a lot of scholars that don't even believe that Homer was one person. But just the tongue in cheek of, oh, he's lost an eye, that's why he's the blind poet, and then they don't even go so far as that because he can still see with the other eye. And so to have Odysseus call him his little Cyclops, then I thought, oh, okay, so this is where the character of the Cyclops in the Odyssey comes from, and that's why he would have written about it. And, so they're kind of playing, fast and loose with some of these historical ideological or ideals, and then for him to later be blinded again further, taking it to the whole fact that Homer ends up blind. I thought those were clever little things, and so I thought that worked in kind of a meta way.
Yeah, and I think the fact that that's why we don't get as much of the actual story of the final episode in the novel is because they tried to make that connection instead of, I went blind with my other eye later, as opposed to so he could actually see the rest of the events play out.
Correct.
Can anybody explain to me why we've not had a name drop since then? Surely there's been many, many, many opportunities for some writer somewhere to have the Doctor utter, well, yeah, I was responsible for the Trojan horse. And it would be such a throwaway line, but then the old school fans would be like, uh-huh.
It seems like one of the Fourth Doctor TV stories, where he says
Underworld.
that he didn't come up with the idea of the Trojan horse. He does mention it. It's a throwaway.
Oh, he does in that one, doesn't he?
It's a throwaway, but he says, I don't know, I didn't come up with it. I don't know if that was an intentional nod or if that was just, being clever
Or
with a line.
Forgot.
Yeah.
I didn't come up with it. That's even funnier than claiming it.
Well, I like the what is it, an ontological paradox of it, the fact that, the Doctor comes up with it because Homer introduced the idea, and Homer introduces the idea because the Doctor comes up with it. I thought it was kind of one of those clever, roundabout paradox devices.
And I absolutely love the joke of early on when the TARDIS is brought to the Trojans that they consider burning it right away.
Right. And because they were afraid that spies might be inside.
Just that part alone gives this story high marks for me.
Agreed. That whole sequence was just great. There were so many high water marks that kind of ran throughout this. I was pleased that Vicki was actually given something to do, although less pleased that, the reasoning that she was giving something to do, but pleased that the outcome of the something to do, I guess.
But I thought she had even though she was, quote unquote married off, I thought they had built up well enough chemistry that I could believe it. Especially knowing that he had lost everything, and so she wanted to go and be with him.
Yeah, I don't so much have a problem with it because so many times companions leave for, worse reasons, or the reasons for leaving are just like kind of blown off. And so at least giving her a reason to stay behind, albeit having to develop it into a 4-part story, feels a little rushed. But at least it gives a reason behind her staying. I think that was something that the book probably failed on, was not developing it's almost like Cotton decided to really give us insight into that relationship in that whole conversation in the cell where Stephen is actually let in because he shows him the little pathway or the little secret door to get through. And So it's almost like he decides to give it all of it to there. But I think that the television serial does a good job of spreading that out and showing their kind of this budding relationship in a more slowed pace, and so it makes it a little more believable.
Yeah, I agree. I think of the relationships where the companion leaves at the end, this was one of the more believable ones.
I think it's established in a book later or a short story later that the first Doctor knows that Vicki would become Cressida and leave. That he had some insight into that. He didn't know exactly how it would happen, but he knew that it would. I don't know why, but it'll be interesting when we get there to find out how that ties in. And I like the idea of going a step further of not only including Homer and Homer's tales of this, but also Chaucer and Shakespeare, who both wrote plays about, or both wrote stories about Troilus and Cressida. So it takes it even a step further to, well, Vicky's actually the person behind the characters that are written in that, or at least the influence on the characters written in both of those pieces.
Fun stuff.
Yeah, it was good. If this is one that I after seeing it twice, and the second time I saw it, I must have had a cleaner loose cannon copy of it, because when the first time I watched it, it was really like grainy and washed out. This time it seemed to be a lot cleaner, so I think maybe I have another file of it somewhere that's not as good as this one. But being the second time to watch us through, it's one of those ones that I really pine for them to either find or animate, because I think this would lend well to the type of stories that they're animating, even though it's a quote unquote historical, although it's not, it's a mythical, but quote unquote, historical piece. And they've kind of shied away from doing those. I think there's enough action and enough comedy in it that I think this could be a candidate.
I was thinking the same thing as I was watching it. I was, while you could argue that, well, not only is it a quote unquote historical, it's also a talkie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because until you get to that last part, it's really a bunch of people sitting around arguing about what to do with them, and that would not lend itself well to animation. And yet, because of the characters involved, because it is sprinkled through with these fights, and I would love to see an animated version of this. I think it would just be great. Yeah. Just gangbusters.
Absolutely. Animate it now.
Put it on the list. Next
one after Fury from the Deep, the Faceless, or the Mythmakers.
I still rather see Evil of the Daleks first, and then and then this one. All right,
and then we'll have to come back to it because
yeah, well,
we reviewed it earlier.
I feel like the other thing we need to talk about is Katarina's introduction.
Oh, we certainly should.
Fairly small and anticlimactic as it is.
So here's the thing I had read this in a review years ago. Somebody else was talking about Katarina seeing her introduction feels very quick and shoehorned, and there's some implications that they knew that the actress who plays Vicki, I've lost her.
Maureen O'Brien.
Thank you. They knew that Maureen O'Brien was going to leave, and they had some heads up ahead of time, so it wasn't a surprise. But that perhaps that while writing this story, they didn't. It was this was submitted before that maybe that was written in, and he at least had hoped that at least we saw Katarina in the background or something in these other story, these first several episodes, because for her to show up so quick. And I guess the other thing that I've read too is that there's a conversation between her and Vicki early on where Katarina expresses that she has seen her death, because she's an assistant to Cassandra, and her death has been foretold to her. And she confides in Vicki about that, and Vicki kind of helps her kind of massage her fears about it. Don't worry about it. I don't think it's going to happen, kind of thing. And so it lends to the fact that that's part of the reason why in the beginning of the Daleks' master plan she thinks she's on her way to the afterlife, because not only does she see the Doctor as a god, but she thinks she's being taken to the afterlife because of this premonition that she had of her death. So I think there was a lot more being built around that. And then, of course, we know the story of they felt like Katarina, they'd have to explain too much to her, that she was somebody from past history didn't work because they'd be asking too many questions. And then obviously later on they figured out how to do it with Jamie. But I think that there could have been, I think there might have been more that would have maybe not made it feel like she was just kind of shoved into this last piece.
Yeah, and I think the actual TV story does it better than the novelization. She's in the final episode way more than she is in the last part of the novelization.
Well, that makes me...
Because that whole conversation wasn't even in the novel that I remember.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. And that's what makes me wonder if Cotton had written this already and the producer or the script editor had kind of put it in there and added it in. And so he left it, he just enough in the book so that it still, kept with how, whoever's writing the next book, it, keeps the character. But he probably didn't have much to write about her in the book because he probably didn't have much to write about her in the series, and she got added to. So,
yeah.
I don't know. I would have liked to have gotten at least a little bit more from her, since we don't get much out of Dalek's master plan. So
she doesn't last long.
No. Well, anything else that we need to touch on this one? If not, Sean, what do we got coming up on the schedule?
Coming up on the schedule, you might call it Schedule Victorious. We are not dipping our toes in, jumping in with both feet. And when we next meet, we will cover, at least peripherally, because we won't have the opportunity to go to the escape room for A Dalek Awakens. But we will also look at Defender of the Daleks #1 and The Guide to the Dark Times, which is a short story that's going to come out in the new annual, if it's not already out. Is that already out? Does anybody know? I think it's scheduled to come out.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in a little bit, because
okay. I've
got an update for you, but it's behind the scenes. So,
is my schedule correct then?
Yeah, I think we're still good.
Okay. I'll leave it at that and say that's all I care about at this point. So you can follow along on our website schedule, or look at the Time Lord Victorious schedule and kind of gauge your homework assignments appropriately from there.
Yeah, most definitely. And I'm super excited. I think this looks like a really fascinating experiment that they're doing here, covering all these different things.
I just hope they execute it well. That's my biggest concern. That's a lot of moving pieces.
Just give me a good story. Tell it well.
Right. Well, as Sean mentioned, be sure you check out our website, travelingthevortex.com, for updates. And while you're there, click on our Patreon link and consider supporting us. And thank you to those who are already supporting us. And remember, you can rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts and the Google Play Store and various other sites where you find our podcast. Give us a 5-star rating if you like what we're doing, and give us a few nice comments, and we would certainly appreciate that. If that's going to do it for this time, until next time, I'm Glenn.
I'm Sean.
I'm Keith.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Be seeing ya. Thanks for listening.
You have been listening to Traveling the Vortex. Doctor Who and all of its associated programs are owned and trademarked by the BBC. No infringement is intended or implied.